Welcome. This is Business Edge on News Central. I'm Tolulope Adileru Balogun. Our headline story: Ghana raked in $2 billion in 2020 despite COVID-19 lockdown. 2020 is on record as one of the most humbling years in modern history. The coronavirus pandemic eroded the earning power of many nations as it spread across the globe. Incidentally, Ghana, like China, are a few exceptions to that rule. Ghana, on her part, exported essentials like gold, cocoa, and of course, oil. We'll take a look at how this happened. We'll also touch base with a few stories we're keeping our eyes on with NC4 to watch before we finish the show. Welcome. This is Business Edge. Now, 2020 is the year the world came to a standstill in many ways, none more so than economically. The COVID-19 pandemic literally brought many to the brink of bankruptcy. Now, despite the impact of the coronavirus pandemic on global economies, Ghana recorded a trade surplus of $2.015 billion in 2020, according to data from the Bank of Ghana. This is equivalent to 3% of Ghana's gross domestic product. Now, according to the Bank of Ghana's January summary of economic and financial data, total exports were estimated at $14.45 billion, while total imports were $12.43 billion. Compared to 2019, this is less than that year. Even so, it's not that far off. In 2019, the country earned $15.6 billion from exports and $13.4 billion from imports. Though the coronavirus pandemic has led to partial lockdowns and restrictions in most economies, Ghana benefited from diversified exports like gold, oil, and cocoa. Gold and cocoa profited immensely from increased prices on the international market. Gold was the biggest export earner, bringing in a revenue of $6.7 billion, representing 47% of total exports. It was followed by oil, which brought in $2.9 billion, that's 20.1%, and cocoa, which brought in $2.3 billion, which is 16.1%. Now, all other exports, that is non-traditional exports, brought in about $2.35 billion, representing 6.8% of Ghana's total exports. Now, joining me on Business Edge is financial analyst and specialist in the oil and gas sector, Benjamin Ato Quansah, and he joins us from Accra, Ghana. Benjamin, good to see you again. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me again.
All right, so Ghana seems to have gotten the pandemic formula right, where we see so many people trying to struggle to bring their economies back to at least pre-COVID era numbers and figures. And it seems they've had partial lockdown only in areas with extreme cases. Is this one of the ways that Ghana was sort of able to perform magic in 2020? What's responsible for the numbers that we see coming out of Ghana for 2020?
I agree with you. Targeted lockdown measures was only a part of the strategies that the government of Ghana employed in managing the pandemic while trying to preserve its economy as well. The diversity of the economic growth contributors also played a significant part of the output. Just like you mentioned earlier, Ghana's biggest export commodity is cocoa, and this contributes about 50% of revenue from exports for the West African nation. Now, the price of gold rose by historic levels, closing the year about 25% higher than the same period last year. At some point last year, even, the market prices of gold were around $2,000 an ounce. A similar story can be said of cocoa and other major commodity exports in Ghana that you mentioned. Now, on the flip side, due to the impact of the pandemic on productivity in other countries and lockdown restrictions that were imposed by the government, Ghana had to act quickly to become, at least to some extent, more reliant on its local industry than in previous years. So, for instance, the local pharmaceutical industry capitalized hugely on this pandemic to locally produce items that would have hitherto been imported: sanitizers, nose masks, supplements, and general medications that are used in the treatments of COVID patients were, and in fact, still are being produced largely by local pharmaceutical companies. The agri sector also grew, and this helped in reducing the expenditure on imports to contribute to the trade surplus that Ghana experienced in 2020.
Okay, so let's talk about oil as well. Now, oil price is a savior for many economies on the African continent, and now particularly with the OPEC Plus agreement, which is to increase output despite having oil selling just around $50 per barrel. Now, in terms of how this affects Ghana, do you see this being continued beyond March 2021 when they're supposed to meet and decide what April's numbers and figures will look like?
News of the US stimulus checks is what I believe drove oil prices to the levels that we see currently. I think that the OPEC Plus must, like I've mentioned in my other interviews, be careful with the extent to which its members increase supply of the black gold. High levels of supply without a corresponding increase in demand for the product could drive prices down. Back to the impact of the US stimulus checks, I think that the price levels of oil that we are seeing now is sustainable if there are similar stimulus packages by the US government to last beyond March, which is when the current plan is supposed to end. Now, if this doesn't happen, then the coronavirus vaccines must be more readily available to a larger populace and must be seen to be working. Otherwise, more countries may end up in locking down with these coronavirus strains again, and the effects of this on oil prices will definitely be negative.
So we also have the situation where Ghana and the Ivory Coast have created names for themselves in partnership with each other by forming Farm Gate. So now this is getting to cocoa and how it has impacted Ghana's economy. And this came in handy because they were able to set the prices of cocoa on the international market. But we have seen some pushback. And that pushback, we don't know how far that's going to go. So how far do you think Ghana and the Ivory Coast can go with farm gates, particularly given that there is pushback, but we're still in the COVID era? The COVID pandemic is still out and about. So do we believe that they're still going to be able to sustain, maybe even increase the numbers into 2021?
I think this alliance has been far too long overdue. The Ivory Coast together with Ghana produce more than 50% of cocoa worldwide, but only accounts for about 6% of revenue from cocoa and cocoa products worldwide. These numbers don't even make a little bit of sense if you think about it, but that's the reality that African nations face. If you look at countries like the DRC and the revenues they receive from copper and other base metals, of which they are leading producers, you realize that there is still a lot to be desired from African leaders. I believe this alliance between Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire is a message and a testament to other African countries of what can be achieved with proper collaborations. I'm sure other countries will follow suit in the coming months and years with commodities that they, together with other countries, possess a competitive advantage in. However, I believe that the true solution in bridging the gap or this imbalance between production and revenues received is for African nations to develop their secondary sectors so that they can process the majority of their primary produce. That is the only true way to realize the real benefits from natural resources on this continent.
So that's again getting into a conversation of the value chain. So much of the resources on the continent leave in such a very natural and raw state and then are brought back, with us only being responsible for bringing them out of the earth. And adding no further value. So you've mentioned other African countries getting on board with things like commodity farm gates depending. So Cote d'Ivoire and Ghana are 1 and 2 on the list of top producers for cocoa. Number 3 is Indonesia, then followed by Nigeria and Cameroon. Are we hearing anything about possibly, as a quick aside, about Nigeria or Cameroon getting on board with the farm gate train sometime this year? Are we hearing anything in regards to that?
From my side, I haven't heard anything. I think I need to do more research on that, but I haven't heard anything from that side. But I feel that what Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire are achieving with this farm gate that they have been able to come together to form is a message, and it's going to tell other African countries to come together with the things that they're able to do and then control the prices more. I think that the pushback that Ghana and Ivory Coast are receiving from this alliance that they have formed is not going to last very long, because together we produce almost 60% even of the cocoa of cocoa worldwide, and so any form of pushback will be very minimal if these two countries decide not to even export cocoa for a year. The impact on the cocoa industry worldwide, Switzerland and other European countries that rely on these raw materials for their produce, is going to be very dire. And so I think that other countries will stand to benefit a lot. And so I'm sure conversations are ongoing, but we need to keep our ears on the ground.
All right, so before we go for a quick timeout, let's get to another one of Ghana's exports, which is gold. And gold is the safe haven of last resort for many nations and even wealthy individuals. And we see gold had a really interesting year in the midst of the pandemic. So gold ended 2020 at 25.4% higher than the 2019 price of $1,408 an ounce. In December 2020, the gold price peaked at $1,860 an ounce. So do you see this good fortune continuing in 2021 with gold, which then means countries like Ghana will reap more of the benefits?
Indeed, gold is a safe haven for investors during economic disasters like the one that we have now worldwide. We can recall that even at certain points last year, gold prices got as high as $2,050 an ounce. The sustainability of these levels of prices will depend on how quickly nations recover from the effects of this this pandemic has had on their economies. In other words, gold producers will enjoy this good fortune to the extent that the negative economic impact of the pandemic continues to linger on. I mean, this sounds a little crude, but that's the truth. I do not see nations recovering fully from this pandemic this year or even next year. I think gold producers will enjoy this good fortune well into 2022.
Wow. So gold producers to enjoy the gold fortunes well into 22. But when you look at how things are going, and of course, given the fact that the vaccine rollout across the continent or across the world, rather, is not equal, that does make some sense. So Benjamin, hold on. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll still touch a bit on gold and how cryptocurrencies that really have been in the news might affect that price, and then get into some more oil conversation. And we have to talk about debt servicing. You're making money, but you still have some debts to pay. All of that when we come back. This is Business Edge. Stay with us. This is Business Edge, and I still have financial analyst joining me from Accra, Ghana, Benjamin Ato Quansah. We're talking about Ghana's good fortunes, even though 2020 was a pandemic year for many countries. Now, Benjamin, let's continue our conversation about gold very briefly. According to gold.org, they suggest that in general, gold may see a positive, though more subdued performance in 2021. And this is good news, as you said, for countries like Ghana. But you also have cryptocurrencies and how they seem to be changing the narrative or challenging the status quo. And not to say they're completely turning into the safe haven, but they are adding some interesting dynamics to the situation. Is cryptocurrency anything to worry about for Ghana in terms of how it might impact their gold sales?
Not exactly. I think that the conversation around cryptocurrencies is still not complete. There are a lot of unanswered questions about how effective cryptocurrencies are in terms of acting as a store of value for investors. In fact, we've had investors like Warren Buffett and then the CEO for JP Morgan Chase coming out very strongly against cryptocurrencies and how they can really work and act as a substitute for actual currency. And so I do not see that to be a big problem. I think that it will take a long time, or at least to an extent, it's going to take a number of years before people really accept it as a real store of value and a real replacement for actual currencies. And so in that light, I think that gold producers are going to enjoy the good fortunes from their gold for quite some time.
All right, so back to the oil conversation. We never can get enough of that, literally. Looking at the current price of oil and with the possibility of more stability from producers, what would you forecast in terms of earnings for Ghana? Would you forecast increased earnings, or would you rather be cautious till the next OPEC plus meeting that we're anticipating?
Of course, Ghana stands to gain from the current price of oil on the export side, but the dynamics when it comes to prices of oil are multifaceted.
Yeah.
So we have higher oil prices, meaning that higher cost of petroleum products being imported into the country. This translates into higher levels of inflation with its associated problems in our continent. At the same time, that means that, of course, you're going to be receiving greater revenues from Ghana's oil exports. Countries look at all of this and how this pans out and the net effects on their economies. However, as I mentioned earlier, the current price levels largely depend on what happens to U.S. economic stimulus beyond March and how the coronavirus pandemic is subdued. I would rather be cautious until then.
All right, so now let's talk about debts. And so many African countries are having this conversation, and Ghana, like many, has debt servicing to worry about. We've seen the call for debt relief, renegotiation, and even outright cancellation. What do you think is the best path for Ghana in regards to servicing and addressing the debt issue?
Well, it's not just Ghana or it's not just Africa that are in debt. The United States even sits on about $22.5 trillion of debt. The UK, France, Germany, Japan, etc., all these developed Western countries all have debts on their books. So what we get to understand from this is that debt in itself is not a bad thing. The real question is, what do we do with the loans that we take? I think African countries must use debt to finance projects that will pay the loan back and generate revenues well into the future. What we've had is a situation where we borrow not to finance self-financing projects, and where the projects are even self-financing, we only use a fraction of the debts that we've gone to collect to finance them. To be fair, this doesn't happen only in Africa, but the gravity of the problem here is usually so high that it ends up negatively affecting the quality of the projects that are done. I'm talking about where we use the debt to finance projects that are self-financing. To tackle this problem, African governments must first tackle corruption using a more aggressive approach, like other countries in Asia and then Europe, and then use the loans for exactly what they say they are going to use them for.
All right. So we've heard from the Ghanaian president over the weekend, Nana Akufo-Addo, who announced the reimposition of COVID-19 restrictions. Now, he has said that funerals, weddings, concerts, theatrical performances and parties are banned, but private burials with no more than 25 persons in attendance can be held. Beaches, nightclubs, cinemas and pubs would also remain shut. What do you think the effects of these new reimposed restrictions would be on the Ghanaian economy right now?
I think some of these restrictions were not entirely lifted. For a majority of the restrictions that he's reiterating, they were already in existence. They weren't just being enforced as much as they are being enforced now. And that is where the economy of Ghana suffered last year from the local service sector, like the areas that you have mentioned right now. So it's not a lot is going to change because that was the situation previously. The president has is just making this point to reiterate or re-emphasize the importance of the citizens taking these safety protocols serious and making sure that we get this coronavirus pandemic under control.
All right, Benjamin Ato Quansah from Accra, Ghana. Thank you so much for joining me on Business Edge.
Thank you too for having me today.
All right, we'll see you next time. All right, before we wrap things up, let's get you NC4 to watch and hear a few stories we're keeping our eyes on. They may end up as main conversations, but whatever it is, you definitely have your finger on the pulse of business and financial stories coming from the continent. South African private sector activity expanded again in January, albeit marginally, as firms completing outstanding orders helped output increase by its most in 4 years. The IHS Markets Purchasing Managers Index rose to 50.8 in January from 50.2 in December, above the 50 level that denotes expansion for the 4th month in a row. The Netherlands and Morocco are collaborating on a pilot project for the production of drinking water from humidity in the air. The two countries discussed a cooperative project that will make the production of drinking water possible by catching humidity in the air using innovative technologies. Kenya's flour producers are receiving orders for February 14th, but freight capacity is the industry's biggest worry. This is according to Clement Tulizi, who is the chief executive of the Kenya Flour Council. Now, freight demand typically doubles to 5,500 tons in the week before Valentine's Day, requiring an additional weekly shipping capacity of 3,000 tons, he said. Please share some love, buy the flowers, let's help Kenya. And finally, the company income tax paid by oil and gas companies to the Nigerian government has dropped by 4.94 billion naira, or about 10.25% in 2020, according to official figures. An analysis of data collated from the National Bureau of Statistics showed that companies producing crude oil and gas in the country paid 47.74 billion naira in corporate tax last year, down from 52.68 billion naira in 2019. And that's all on this edition of Business Edge. Please don't forget to follow us on social media. We are at News Central TV. Head to our website and download our mobile app on Play Store and Apple App Store. Till next time, I'm Tolu Lokwe Adileru Balogun. Do have a fantastic day.